Welcome to the Core Outdoors podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rawls. This podcast is aimed at helping entrepreneurs in the outdoor industry. Each episode is a conversation with an entrepreneur willing to share what they've learned so that we can benefit from their experiences. This podcast is brought to you by CORE, the Kootenay Outdoor Recreation Enterprise. CORE is a nonprofit organization based in the Kootenay region of interior British Columbia. CORE's mission is to support the growing network of gear and apparel makers and entrepreneurs within the Kootenays. Every year, CORE hosts the Summit. The CORE Summit is the only place where the outdoor, bike, and ski industries come together in Canada. It's the opportunity to connect and learn from one another. This year's conference will include keynote speakers, industry-specific presentations, and workshops on topics like marketing, intellectual property, wholesale sales, e-commerce, accounting, and more. This year's summit is on October 3rd and 4th in Kimberley, BC. We'd love to have you join us there, so register today at coreoutdoors.org/summit. Alex Lauver is the Senior Director of Materials, Innovation, and Sustainability at Outdoor Research. Alex operates in a very cool intersection, which gives him the opportunity to work on projects within the operations of Outdoor Research, but also on projects that bring innovations to market. What I learned from this conversation is that he has the incredible ability to take complex topics and explain them in a simple way that makes them easy to understand. In this conversation, Alex helps shed some light on topics that I've been interested in, but have struggled to understand exactly how they work within the outdoor industry. We talk about sustainability, the circular economy, and he helped me understand what I need to know about new PFAS regulations and how that will drastically impact technical apparel in the near future. I really appreciate Alex's perspective, and I'm grateful for his ability to break things down in a way that I can understand. You will definitely learn some new things listening to this conversation with Alex Lauver. Alex, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the place where I want to start is with your job title, because when I first read it, I was so intrigued. The Senior Director, Materials, Innovation, and Sustainability. First off, that's a long job title, so congrats on that, I guess.
It's a couple commas.
Yeah, a couple commas. Where do these areas intersect, and how do you juggle managing all three of these very distinct areas?
Humbly, I would say not very well. It's a constant struggle. One of the really interesting and good parts about working in outdoor research, and I would even lump that into smaller and medium-sized brands, is you have the opportunity to wear a lot of hats. And it's been a cool opportunity for me to kind of steer my career here at OR of the last 8 years to areas that I wanted to participate in and areas I wanted to work through and where I thought we needed some additional bandwidth. And that's allowed me to end up at this position where I have a flap on my business card that opens to some extent with all these extra words. But the real answer to your question, is all three of those areas actually do have a pretty high level of intersection. Innovation can be throughout your entire business. It can be every team in the building. It can be everything from product to process to simply the way you appear to the consumer, right? So innovation, I was one of the first ones with that job title, with that word in their job title, but we now have several other people. So it's not a one-man band in innovation in any sense. And I'm sure we'll get into that here later. So that word to me just signifies a different approach of the way we do some of the things that we do. Materials and sustainability, though, have a heavy cross back and forth. And one of the things I like to joke about is I have less adult supervision than some folks do in sustainability, in that being the leader of sustainability and being the leader of the raw materials supply chain cuts some of the bureaucracy out of, hey, I got a great idea. We should go do this thing because it lowers our footprint. If that is tied directly to a material or a sourcing effort or a product that we make, I don't have to convince somebody else that it's a good idea. My team just says, oh, can we do it? Let's just do it. And I think that's where the ability for me to cross back and forth between those two areas allows outdoor research to move a little quicker and be more nimble in sustainability.
Very cool. I thought a good place, because I'm coming into this conversation just with curiosity. I hear a lot of these conversations and read a lot of things about sustainability and innovation. And because I don't have the opportunity to be in a larger organization, I miss out on a lot of those things. I'm so curious. And that's why I want to have a conversation with you, because I'm really interested in all three of those areas. So I thought we could just kind of trickle through each kind of category of your job description, so to speak, and start off with the innovation thing. So I'm curious what innovation looks like in outdoor apparel development, like you do at Outdoor Research.
Yeah. I mean, we're not that big of an organization. That's one of the other first things that I like to kind of point out to people. We're the biggest of the small or the smallest of the big, or kind of nice in that medium-y sweet spot. And I think that is a good level set to say that we're blessed to have some of the resources and allocations that we do when some other organizations of our size don't. So classically, in a Fortune 500 company, an innovation leader is usually charged with growing profit, revenue, or market share. I always like to add sort of a third one in there, which is just evolution. Innovation in many ways is just thinking about things differently, approaching challenges from a different light, or bringing a different mindset to problem solving. So in the outdoor apparel space, again, I've been able to sort of wear multiple hats and do multiple things within a word in my job title. A good chunk of my innovation work at OR, as I look back on my career, was not just in making the next product. It was approaching some challenges differently. It was, innovating and ideating a different way to approach challenges like PFAS, which was not necessarily an innovation forward-looking thing, but a regulatory protective backwards-looking thing in some senses. So innovation in outdoor apparel development is, first of all, not something you can schedule. It's not something you can force. And it's absolutely not something that should be in your seasonal roadmap to say, we're going to do these 3 things. Oh, and there'll be an innovation story. And then next season we'll have 2 innovations and we'll have 3 of these new things. And then the season after that, there's a discussion happening here right now of trying to put some metrics around how many patents did we get awarded, how much IP, how much awards did we win? And I'm throwing my hands in the air saying, you're looking at this entirely the wrong way if that's the only thing we want to evaluate and use innovation for. Innovation is a fail fast kind of process. It is a idea numbers game. So if you want to do one really cool and innovative thing, that might mean you got to fail 20 times before you get to it. And it's not always like innovating in the finished product. If we completely game change jackets, we've got 3 sleeves in the jackets now, and we're going to win an ISPA award. It's going to be this big. Sometimes it's like, what really doesn't work well in jackets is the cuff tabs. Let's innovate a way to redo a cuff. No one's going to win awards, and we're not going to sell more jackets per se, innovating a cuff tab, but you have a better user experience. And then we get brand cachet, we get consumer following, and you get that exploratory moment of like, what is this? And go, wow, that is really thought through well. Those are innovative moments, not always just an award-winning, game-changing product.
Sure. From like kind of the management level or just the driving innovation forward, like how do you foster that sense of innovation and that idea of, because I think there's some risks sometimes when people are like, just throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks. Sometimes that's scary for people because you feel like you're being, measured or evaluated upon the things that don't stick. So how do you kind of create that safe space, so to speak, for innovation to be fostered there?
This could be an hour-long podcast conversation.
Let's do it.
Like in this alone, right? There's so many ways that I could answer this question, but the 2 kind of angles that I guess come to mind for me is, first, I got to tell you a little bit of a story, which is that we're rebuilding our innovation team, process, and efforts here at OR. And part of that is because when the pandemic hit, I was reporting on the military side of our business at the time. I was charged with setting up and growing some innovation efforts and trying to foster, or better foster, I guess, the bridge between the 2 sides of our business, the commercial OR brand and what we do in the defense space, which we didn't talk about much at that time, which was cool. It was a cool space to sit. But this thing called the pandemic happened, COVID. I don't know if you've heard of COVID. No one seems to remember COVID or seems to care about COVID anymore, being somewhat tongue-in-cheek. Our entire innovation apparatus completely became dedicated to the sole focus of making masks and helping out first responders, military, police officers, medical, et cetera. We were making 3 different medical grade devices here in the building. Our product development engine actually sits in the former clean room that we built to house those mask machines. So when we came out of the pandemic and all of a sudden you could start getting masks, N95s again from other countries and lower priced production facilities, we spun that business unit down. A lot of that innovation effort and intelligence left. A couple people had left the brand at that point, and we really were pretty gutted because there wasn't a lot of us left. So even 3, 4, 5 years later, or I guess it's been like 3 years later, we're rebuilding that muscle. So fostering innovation, creating that safe space is a challenge that we're living in real time. How we're going about doing it is discussion. You have to talk about it with people to say, we're like I just did, we're not gonna be successful at all time, and you can't force this. One of the biggest challenges with innovation teams is the resources that you give them and the way that you measure their impact. If innovation is purely an ROI effort, return on investment, you're going to fail because you have to spend some money here and you have to fail in ideas or have ideas not work out to then get to the point where they do. And sometimes they're tangential. You start working on a cuff tab and you're like, whoa, this could be a hood idea, so you have to be able to be nimble and pivot to that. And part of that conversation comes also back to the fact that you either have a team of all-stars or you have a dedicated team. And if you've got a dedicated team, you're burning money at a much faster rate in innovation versus a team of all-stars. If you bring your best, your brightest, or people who say, hey, I got a cool idea, I want to come work on this. Like, we foster that here, which is what's great about it. Anybody can come up with a good idea. But the situation is you have to give them time to work on it. We have a lab. You can't go in the lab for an hour once a week and create innovation. You have to be like, I need a whole day to go in there and tinker.
So do you have like basically an innovation team, or are there kind of leaders through? Okay. So it's a whole innovation team that's working on
but it's a team of all-stars. We've got representation from 3 or 4 different areas of the product development engine. And we have people that come in and come out based on projects, needs, expertise. Sometimes we don't need, this skill in this project. And the fact is, again, like I said, you got to give people the space. If you've got, let's make this up, 8 people. If you have 8 people in your innovation team and all 8 people are always working on the same thing at the same time, you're only doing one thing. So if you can create this sort of group that flexes and talks about higher level projects, and I have this idea and you have that idea, and you kind of flex in and out to some extent, more than one idea can get pushed forward at a time. But if someone's working 60 hours a week and our bandwidth is always 100% maxed out, adding this to their plate, which is fun and rewarding, and it's a change of pace, it's creative, it never gets done because they don't have time.
Do you have a workflow, or do you have a standard operating procedure for how you evaluate what's going to get to move to the next phase, right? Like
discussion.
Okay. So It's just like,
we talk about it. We have a meeting, I think it's once a month, for the sort of core members to get together and just whiteboard stuff and talk and just have a dedicated hour to go to the lab. We shut the door and just like, all right, what are we working on? Give me an update. What's cool? We also then have a quarterly meeting. In fact, I think I have one coming up next week where 3 or 4 of the, I'm going to say captains, the people who have innovation in their title, get together with 2 or 3 of our executives and sort of run through a PowerPoint deck. And we've been through several iterations of it. Is it Excel? Is it PowerPoint? But think of it as your portfolio. That's a common word in the innovation spaces. What's your portfolio of projects? Ideally, they're ranked by feasibility, by expense, by potential outcome, and you have some basic information in there. But we run through that PowerPoint deck and just say, here's our status update. Here's a highlight we'd like to give in terms of something that is moving faster than anticipated or really exciting or close to completion. But then the next piece is like, when and where do those come in and out of the seasonal development process? There needs to be a date in the calendar. If you're almost completely at sales meeting, all the way through your commercialization phase, you can't bring an innovation thing. You're like, we're gonna do this today. Let's just bring this over here. There's a process. And part of that process is saying, if this is a cool idea for the season, but it just isn't going to get done in the calendar, well, then let's move it over into the innovation space where it can percolate. Or, hey, we're about done with this innovation project. We're about to go into like the ideation process for the season. Maybe this is a good time to pull this one in and hand it off to the commercialization team or to the wider audience, wider group, and bring it into the plan for the season. That's still tricky for us. We're still working through some of the ins and outs of when projects are ready and when they're not ready.
So outdoor gear, soft goods, hard goods, doesn't matter, either one, are infamous for taking a long time. Like supply chain is very long and takes a long time to get things out there. How do you keep the innovation going and kind of bringing things to market, knowing that it's like, oh, this is a great idea. We'll see it in the real world in 24 months?
Yeah, it's 18-ish months. It's tough. That you end up with occasionally a crisis of like, hey, we got a cool idea. Let's go work on it. And like, oh, somebody came out with it next season. They beat us to the punch. That happens.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would say is that our ideas we're working through, the concepts we're trying to think through, we don't try to chase, the T word, the dreaded T word, the dreaded F word, the trend and fashion. We're not trying to chase the cycle with some of these projects. I mean, that should be an in-season type of development opportunity. These are big, they're chunky, they're cool ideas that require time. So an 18-month lead time doesn't matter in the sense that it could take us 18 months to solve this particular widget thing with a cuff tab. But depending upon what comes out of that project, it might just slide right into the regular seasonal development timeline, like I was saying earlier, in a position where it's just like, great, pick that up, put that in the tech pack, it goes on these 3 things, done. Or, I can't probably say it out loud, but we have one that's coming to market here really soon. The whole product was completely reimagined and reinnovated, and it's going to be somewhat, I think it's patent pending. We're going to try to get some of the pieces and parts patented. It's going to come and basically be done. Like, you just send it right out for the next prototype. We do like 3 rounds of protos, usually P1, P2, P3. We're kind of joking that this is like a P0. Proto's done. The tech pack's going to be built. All the designs have been flushed out because it's a constructed thing. It's like, send it to the factory.
And you can just drop it right into your product line. After.
I mean, ideally. Ideally.
Beautiful.
And each one's different. That's what's cool about it, though. And what gets me jazzed about innovation is that any day, it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. It's always something new and fresh. There's always challenges. There's always weird things that come at you from the side, and it keeps me not getting bored.
Sure.
And I don't do well when I get bored. I cause problems when I get bored.
You touched on something a second ago that brought something up for me. It's a recent conversation, something that I wasn't really aware of for a long time, and then when you become aware of it, you start to see it everywhere, type of thing. And that is the role that defense and industrial applications, the role those play in development of outdoor goods. So whether it be fabric innovations or apparel innovations, PAX is notorious for that, like even shelters.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, like how much you could talk about that, but what kind of role does that play, like in the innovation side of the business, but also in just like the revenue side of the business? Like, do those types of contracts like really start to help fund things that trickle down into the consumer level?
Yeah, they do. It's about 20% of the revenue at the moment. I think I can say that number. It's just a rough average. It's 80-20. So, I mean, it's not a particularly large chunk of revenue, but it's a pretty decent chunk of profit, given that we have a factory on site and one that we operate in California. When you think about the cost structure of a product, any commercial product that we make in this building for outdoor research, everything that happens in this building is essentially overhead, right? That's cost. But when we make a product downstairs and put it in a box and send it to a customer, almost all of what happens in this building is the cost of that good sold, right? Like all of the production, all the fabric, all the people, everything, all that's a cost. So every time we ship a unit out of this building, it's almost pure profit, kind of, if you kind of follow along on the basic mathematics. So it creates an interesting source of revenue, big picture. But smaller picture, those contracts are cyclical. They come and go. It comes with the politics and the time. Like, they're not something you can plan for very easily. So we try not to create a business model that is super dependent on that, because it's feast or famine in that world. And there's some interesting things happening here now, where we're creating some more evergreen product and working with some forces elsewhere in the world, not just here in the US, that allows us to kind of bring the trough of those waves up a little bit, so that we have peaks and some good times, but then we fall back on a predictable business plan. Things coming and going. Yeah. Some of the most interesting, challenging products and projects I've been a part of here have been on that side of the fence. We like to say same outdoors, different mission. It's kind of the way we think about it. That's sort of like catchphrase here of how we think about it. If you're jumping out of an airplane at 30,000 feet and standing on a mountain at 29,000 feet, conditions are pretty similar. So it's an interesting, or if it's wet and cold, wherever you are, it's the same kind of situation. And in some cases, we work with tip of the spear, higher end, not necessarily big army. I don't know how to say this other than, like, we're not talking about just cranking out basic pants that soldiers wear everywhere every day. We make cold weather hands and headwear and some apparel that's built for extreme conditions. So we work with more elite, smaller quantity type units. They do some pretty crazy outdoor activity stuff that we would do in a weekend and be like, man, I had a big busy weekend. Like, those guys do that. Those men and women, they do that. And then they're carrying a gun and ammunition and the radio and go do some kind of a, military operation. So the ability for us to take what works for them and bring it into our space is fascinating. It's fascinating sometimes. And they come up with some really crazy stuff they need us to work on.
I can imagine. Yeah, the specs and the requirements needed are very distinct, I would imagine. It's cool that
Specific.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, specific. How they can spill over. Once you start to pull back the curtain, you realize, oh, wow, there's a lot of innovation happening there. I like that same outdoors, different mission.
Yeah, the other thing that's fun about that side of the house, as we're trying to bring them more into alignment with our process, and there's pros and cons to that, but I think it helps us sort of work together on some of these other things. They're used to working very short lead time.
Sure.
They walk downstairs and start making stuff pretty quickly, where we're like, well, it'd be about 8 weeks until we get a sample. Like 8 weeks, we'd be producing this thing in 8 weeks. So the scale of how they think and approach challenges, I'm one of the few employees here, I think, who's worked on both sides of the fence in the last 2 to 3 years. The cross-pollination efforts are really fun to watch if you haven't worked on either side of the brand before, because neither one fully understands the way stuff comes to fruition. Sometimes you're like, wait, why do I have to wait and fill out a piece of paper? And the other one's like, why are they like badgering me to go so fast? So it's kind of a fun process. And that's where some of that innovation comes from too. They'll literally come up with an idea and churn through 3 protos in a week because they have someone downstairs that can do it. So they fail very fast to get to a solution, where sometimes just the way generic commercial product development happens, it just takes longer. So you don't have as much opportunity to fail at the same fast speed that they can. So it's cool when those projects collide together. Almost everybody who works on it is like, wow, I learned something from that.
Right. That's great. So we've talked about a third of your business title, the innovation. I'd like to move to the sustainability part of it.
Let's do it.
Which is, quite frankly, sustainability is a buzzword right now, and it seems like it's probably lost some of its meaning because it's been overused in some ways. Recognizing the elephant in the room in that sense, because I think that sometimes we're familiar with greenwashing and all those things that kind of happen, and people are just like slapping sustainable onto whatever they can to tick a box. I'd like to get your perspective on like what that means and like how do you approach it in your role at Outdoor Research, and how does the organization view that?
Yeah, sustainability is critical. And I try to stay away from politics in these conversations, because the first and foremost challenge in my role with sustainability, less internally, but we can't even align as a country, or I guess we're sharing a border here, my friend, but our countries in some senses can't align on whether or not there's a problem. So how do we start fixing the problem if we can't even agree there is a problem? And the fact of the matter is, scientifically speaking, we're seeing an awful lot of evidence of climate change. And, the hurricane that is ravaging the Caribbean right now is a great example of like lots of people are freaking out about it and saying, hey, where did this come from? Like, no, we've been predicting that this would happen. It happened earlier than we anticipated. This is like this year's first example of it. We haven't even gotten into wildfire season and some of the other climate change related signs. So park the politics to the side and just be like, we need to do something. It's clearly something is happening. The first challenge is exactly what you said, which is there are 2 sides to sustainability. One is doing the hard work and doing the things that need to happen in order for us to adapt and change. And the other side of it is talking about it. I think we've entered a space now, and I can speak about outdoor, I won't speak about other industries, where generally speaking, I think most companies have good intentions and are not trying to greenwash. Genuinely believe we've reached that point. That has done one of 2 things. Either people are just getting completely lambasted for greenwashing now in an accidental situation where they weren't trying to. And that in some senses is really hard, because that leads to the next biggest challenge happening today, which is green hushing, which is that some companies and brands don't want to talk about sustainability out of fear that they don't get it right, or it's not fully baked, and then they're going to get criticized for it. And that only then propagates the cycle that we're in to some extent. That breaks my heart. We can't even agree that there's a problem, and now we're forcing people to not do things or not talk about the things they are trying to do, which is essentially reducing innovation in the space. So if we know that there's a company working on a project and it didn't quite go the way it is, or they didn't quite figure out one of the things that I figured out, and I hear about it, instead of, aha, gotcha, why can't we celebrate the fact that they took a risk and they tried something, they tried to innovate, they did their best, and then say, hey, I actually have a solution for this one piece here. I can help you make this thing better. And then we pre-competitively, and I'm involved in some of the OIA pre-competitive work. So I have a passion for it, I guess you could say. Why can't we help them improve it versus point fingers and call them out and say you did something wrong? That's a big challenge in my role here is we're trying to figure out 3-4 years and do a pretty good amount of work. Like, how do we start talking about this?
Green hush. That's it. That's interesting. That's a new concept for me, and I didn't realize that was a thing. But I can see it now because it is part of the culture right now. Is like people seem to make a habit or a joy out of calling people out on things. So I could see where, yeah, if you think you're stepping in the right direction and somebody calls you out on it, then it's like, oh God, it wasn't even worth taking that step in the first place. So what are the bigger innovations, or what are the bigger, I shouldn't even use the word innovations anymore, but what are the bigger steps in sustainability that OR has taken in the recent years that you've been a part of and you're really proud of where it's headed? It's not a destination, obviously, it's progress.
Yeah, I mean, it's progress, but I would say it's kind of like a road trip. You get to the end destination is so far away and it's so many boring hours in the car, but you've got all these overnights and these cool side jaunts, and there's destinations along the way that you get to and you're like, wow, that was great. And then I go get back in the car. That's kind of how it feels at times. I think some of the things I'd like to say here to answer this is, first of all, if you or your organization have decided that you want to make a difference and you want to pay attention to your impact, and outdoor research classifies it as people, product, and planet. All three of those are important. All three of those should be in balance to some extent. You can't reduce what you can't measure. So as much as like, what could you do first? Start using recycled inputs in your product if you create tangible products. That's great. And that's what we did. And we've got some progress to share for that. But what we didn't do, and I have a 50-50 opinion on this, I sway by the day. We didn't set ourselves up so that work was something that we could measure. And not necessarily, and I've been called out on that once before in a presentation I was doing somewhere, because they're like, oh, well, all you wanted to do was make it a marketing opportunity. Well, a little bit. I'd like to get some credit for what we did, the hard work, but it's more along the lines of being able to measure the improvements that we made. And we can't do that because we didn't start out with a plan. You have two options. Either just get started and make the best decisions you can, or wait 3 years, build a plan, and then start executing against your plan. We took the first path. Let's just start making good decisions and then figure this out as we go. And that's where I go back and forth whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. But you can't reduce what you can't measure. So the first step for most organizations or people who want to make a difference in their impact is to figure out how to measure it so that they have a rubric to make decisions against. And it took us a couple of years to get to this point. So one of the things I'm most proud of is that we completed that journey. And last year we set science-aligned targets. And now the hard part is how do we start working and making progress against those targets? But that journey was very illustrative and helped us build that decision-making process. That's probably the thing I'm most proud of, but it's not a tangible like story of this little cool thing or whatever. And that's what makes it hard to talk about.
Sure. So maybe to try to realize it or actualize it a little bit, like what would you say is like the low-hanging fruit for a younger brand?
Yep.
If you were going to do it over again, or a smaller brand or whomever it may be, like what is the low-hanging fruit just to like, this is where you should start?
Yeah, I mean, the low-hanging fruit, unfortunately, still comes back to the question of, do you want to be able to measure what you've accomplished and talk about it in a way that is avoiding greenwashing or green hushing, because that's what you need to work on first. But the things that you can start first and foremost, it ain't sexy. And that's what people kind of get disheartened. And one of the reasons I'm working on the industry level is to help foster some knowledge around this and sort of support people further behind in the journey or just getting started in this journey. You need to know your supply chain. Outdoor Research is a tangible product company. We make physical goods. We do make durable goods in terms of one of the most common things people say is like, well, if your products last longer, then you can, it's less impact over time. Reduce waste in the creation process, which is like cutting markers in factories and stuff like that. But what people don't necessarily understand is the outdoor industry is a durable goods market. You keep your rain jacket a heck of a lot longer than you keep stuff that you buy seasonally, for your everyday wardrobe. And reducing waste is money, right? Like our marker efficiencies are pretty high compared to other apparel sectors, given that we have very expensive materials we use. So those are two kind of easy, low-hanging fruit that I think our industry has already done. The next one is understanding your supply chain, because within that tangible goods model that Outdoor Research and our cohort operate under, roughly 80 to 85% of our carbon footprint is tied up in the creation of raw materials, or the physical creation of finished product. So we hear often like, well, you travel to Asia, you're flying around the world in an airplane. And what about, end of life and all these sort of buzzwords that people throw out about sustainability. And it's a bit of a lack of awareness of the piece of that puzzle. So all that doesn't matter. I can fly around the world 365 days a year and work from a laptop on Delta Airlines. And ultimately, it still is just a drop in the bucket of our carbon footprint. So unfortunately, one of the low-hanging fruit is to educate your stakeholders and educate your team where that impact is, so that they can actually not spin wheels doing things that don't matter and do the things that do. So recycled inputs, would be that example.
And I guess that's the hard part, is if most of our supply chain is outsourced to contract factories and contract suppliers, that we don't get to control exactly how they do.
You have a low amount of control.
So what are the things that we can do if we don't have control over those factories? Those are all contract factories. What are the things that we can do to help nudge them in the direction that we want things to go from a sustainability perspective?
Great question. That's some of the things that the Outdoor Industry Association is working on, which is creating these sort of pre-competitive collaborative opportunities. But again, one of them is know your supply chain, know them. Ideally, you're not jumping back and forth between factories every day, left and right, and you're creating a meaningful relationship. We're, especially the supply chain, I'm on the raw material side, not the finished goods side, but we have several of these partners we've been working with way longer than I've been part of this brand. We treat them like partners. We have dialogue with them. We try to visit with them, and we just say, look, your business or your portion of our business is important. We want to be meaningful to you. So we say, we want to be more meaningful to less people. And if you're having those conversations and you're being genuine in how you run your business, eventually you're going to reach a group of people who mean important things and some who don't, and you can kind of work towards that. But in those dialogues, I share often what our mission is and what our goals are as it relates to things other than just price and quantity. Those are the levers that can be pulled when we evaluate some of the other tangible things we want to accomplish. And if we talk about sustainability and I see somebody go, oh yeah, stay right here, I'm going to go grab somebody real quick who might have a cool idea for you. Or, I walk into a business meeting like, hey, we want to take 4 minutes and talk about this other initiative around people, planet, or product. Those are good aha moments to say, this partner is going to make change for us, or we're going to be invited to participate in change. If I talk about sustainability and the merchandiser we work with to buy fabric from just kind of nods and says, yeah, we have recycled. Yeah. Maybe they're not going to participate the way we want them to. So sure. you got to get to know them. You got to talk to them.
Yeah. And I think we've had conversations on the podcast with other people about their relationships with factories. I forget the phrase you said, meaning more to less people, or something similar to that.
Yeah.
Like that's important. It's like not bouncing around. Like that's good business practice just from a cost perspective, but also like if you really want to make an impact on the supply chain, the only way you can ask for favors is if you stick around long enough to be able to earn those favors.
Yeah, to some extent, or ideally you're finding opportunities where your goals and their goals align.
Sure, definitely. I mean, I guess it's similar to for the consumer side. Like that's how we're going to get industry and markets to change, is if the consumers start to demand it, right? And same thing as you go further up. If you go further upstream the supply chain, it's the same thing's just going to continue to happen. So hopefully the ripple effect takes a hold. Something that I guess in my mind, I'm new to it. I honestly don't understand a lot of it, and it comes up a lot in core and amongst members, and we've had people present on it at the summit and things like that. Is the idea of circularity, and that seems to be this circular economy is something that people are talking about a lot. What is well, I guess first I'll step back, help me understand from like the 30,000 foot level, what does that mean? Like, what is the circular economy? Kind of give me that overview, and then. Is there a place for the circular economy inside of the outdoor industry? Is that even a potential?
Yeah, this is the leading edge of what we're trying to sort of accomplish now in the industry circles. I think the 30,000 foot view would sort of be, first of all, what is circularity, right? And circularity is essentially creating more of a closed loop production process so that we're not taking raw materials to create new things at the same rate. Hard to kind of understand. So the two things that I would say, again, how are you measuring this? So if you don't have a good methodology to say, we're at X, we're trying to get to Y, or we're at X, we're trying to get to Z, and now we're at Y. It doesn't give you a frame of reference to be able to some extent to understand if you're making progress toward circularity. So the two, and that's greenhouse gas, footprint in most cases. The two things that you can really start to do is either decouple financial growth from making new things. So what does that mean? Well, it's resale. We make durable goods. And if in 3 years I don't like my jacket or my backpack or my boots or more durable things than a t-shirt per se, how do I get those in the hands of someone else who will continue to use it, love it, and extend the life of that product, because that reduces its impact ultimately, because that person is no longer, not only am I throwing it away, not throwing it away, that person's not buying something that's new that was used in an extractive process. That is a huge goal for the industry, but there's tons of logistics with that. Some of the new legislation is going to be, some legislation is going to be supportive of it, and some of it, including some of the PFAS related concerns happening, are actually going to get in the way of certain levels of circularity, which is going to be, I think, an interesting thing for us to work through as we go. And there's still a good swath of culture who says, ew, I don't want to use something someone else has already used. And we're going to have to figure that out. The second piece of it is not doing the extractive process in the first place, which is figuring out a way to make new things from older things. So back to the example, t-shirts, right? Like, it's pretty hard for you to get rid of a t-shirt and have somebody else wear it to some extent. We got to figure out how to make t-shirts out of old t-shirts. And what most, I think, basic consumers don't always understand, when you see a recycled tag on your new running t-shirt, your synthetic polyester t-shirt, that wasn't polyester from t-shirts before. It was probably plastic soda bottles. And when you get rid of that shirt and ideally put it into some sort of a recycling stream, it gets downcycled. We're talking about upcycling and downcycling. You're downcycling that t-shirt into insulation for houses or dog beds, or gets repolymerized into some kind of other, PET that goes into another injection molded type product or something. So we're not yet in a circular economy where we're making t-shirts from t-shirts. God knows we have enough of them in the planet. I wish I had the statistic handy of what contribution of the global waste the apparel industry is, but it's high. It's a high number, shockingly high. So that's the circular economy that I think we have the most opportunity in, is those two processes. Now, getting down into the nuts and bolts of it, it's not easy. And in some cases, there's been some discussion of, hey, here's a cool way to make nylon or polyester from other substrates. And then you're not using virgin petroleum products to make it. But then the question becomes energy. There's a lot of water, or there's energy in resynthesizing and formatting some of these polymers. Where does that come into in the carbon footprint? So again, it's that greenwashing by complete accident, where someone's like, guess what? We're using tires, which are horrible to dispose of, and we're making it into nylon. And my answer was, great. Can you show me energy consumption of whether or not you're using more or less energy? Because that's actually what we're talking about here, is carbon footprint. Well, no, we haven't done that work yet, I think. And it's, well, by the way, it's 40% more expensive. And that comes back, I think, to one of my favorite sayings. When you talk about circularity, economic feasibility and technical feasibility, those ideally both are in the positives, but occasionally and most often one is good and one is bad. So recycling tires into nylon right now is absolutely technically feasible. Economically, I'm not convinced yet.
Do the tools exist for people to be able to measure, like, how much how much energy this is taking? We think we're doing something good, but in our hopes of doing something good, we're actually doing something worse. So do the tools even exist, or is it just every person for themselves?
Yes, I would caution you to not say in trying to do something good, we're doing something bad.
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily mean if it causes more energy that's a bad thing.
Okay.
But you need to have answers and statistics to understand what that then looks like, right? There are other pieces and parts of your carbon footprint or your material footprint where it still may be something positive. And then again, we have to look at this in the whole political sphere of the net goal of getting to a reduction of emissions. If I'm spending a little bit more energy over here, but we're spending a dramatically lower amount of energy over there in terms of disposing tires, net for the planet, it's a good thing. And that is where I start getting into a really ugly, slippery slope that I have not spoken publicly about that much, which is regulatory positioning good or bad for the outdoor industry? And, we're really getting shellacked right now with this whole PFAS thing. And that's a real statement. I've been criticized for that in a couple of presentations as well, excuse me. But at the same time, It is. It's going to be a really difficult thing for our industry. It's a good thing for people and planet, and I'm pro getting rid of PFAS, high level. But could there be, I don't know, man, tax credits? If we use recycled tires as inputs in nylon, it's 40% more expensive. Could there be some kind of economic engine to make it to say, this is really good for the planet. We should incentivize this business model so that brands can buy it at the same price as regular, recycled nylon. That would be great. But what does that look like? How do we do that in a global economy this day and age? So this is where the answer to your question just gets so complicated and frankly, really interesting, which is how do we set up systems of support at an industry level or even at a, economic level to foster some of this? And it comes right back, unfortunately, I'm not trying to be negative, but it comes right back to the whole point of we can't even agree there's a problem.
Right.
So how are governments going to figure this stuff out?
Sure. I had a question about how is it even possible for the outdoor industry to move, further and further along the circularity thing? Do you see a road ahead?
Yes.
You
absolutely.
see it. Yeah,
absolutely. I 100% believe we have the capability to do this. And I think the answer is going to be that collaboration. The only way we change the world is together. And we're working through the agenda right now for the industry's first in-person sustainability event that we have not had one since pre-pandemic. It's going to be this fall. It's publicly released. It's called Catalyst in Seattle, of all places, which will be great because it's my backyard. I will be there. And I had a phone call with our I think she's director of sustainable business, Julie Brown, at the OI yesterday, where she was like, hey, what do you think about the agenda? And we're talking through some things. And she's like, I think we should talk about circularity. I said, yeah, 100% we should talk about that. And, we talked about where it fits in the agenda. And it was like, what could we get out of this? And we literally had this conversation, which was, how do we make sure that we're part engaging to say, this is important. We believe in it. We can do it. Here's our roadmap. But then also say, we don't want to just have people on stage talking about stuff. We want to get some of these individuals attending this conference to go talk together about ideas and things they're doing and start to foster that collaborative approach so that people work together. Oh, I should call you after this and we should work on this thing together. And hey, I got a guy that you should call. Instead of we just sit there and sip our free beverages and just watch somebody talk to a PowerPoint on stage. That's one of the mindset shifts happening in the outdoor industry right now. It's away from the educational side of, hey, you should pay attention to this. You should do something about it. Here's what I did. More to, this is the goal. This is how we're going to get there. Tons of people in this room have expertise and experience. Go talk to other folks about it. That's how we make change.
Yeah. Solve the problem collectively.
Yes.
Right. You mentioned the first step is durable, making durable goods. And that's something that we're typically good at as an industry. It seems like this is something that's interesting for Core as we look more into kind of the reuse and the repurpose in gear repair. And there's some really cool initiatives out there happening and brands taking it on themselves. How big of a role do you think kind of the repair and keeping things, why don't we see more of it? Is it, in this is from the brand's perspective, and I've heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, that it's actually a loss leader for brands. It's why aren't we seeing more brands offering repair as opposed to just oh, here's a credit for a new one?
Yeah, this is a really good topic. The thing that we struggle with to some extent here, and it's even more challenged because we have a factory here, so we have tons of skilled expertise who could do repairs. One of the biggest situations that people need to think through, and again, I was a former product manager of outerwear, so it's an easy category for me to speak to. Not that there's other, footwear, water bottles, bikes, pants, there's all kinds of other stuff. You have to design into repairability. And I think look at the cell phone market today as a really good example where, way back when cell phones, you could replace tons of parts on your phone if needed. The antenna thing screwed off and you could pull the antenna out. I'm dating myself a little bit. You had removable batteries and you could buy a second battery and charge it and swap the batteries in and out. The keyboard, everything was hinged, whatever. Today, your iPhone is a solid state thing with 3 buttons, and some of them don't even have that anymore. And you can't take it apart to fix it. And if the screen cracks, the device is kind of done. And there's a ton of legislation happening, and it's probably going to start in Europe around the right to repair and the right to be able to fix some of these things. That is the problem we get into in rain jackets. They are expertly crafted, high levels of design, and production expertise and tight tolerances. They're seam taped. You're using really expensive zipper pieces, etc. So if your zipper breaks, which is a fairly common one in waterproof tooth zippers, that jacket's done. It'd be great to be able to fix that zipper, but you have to remove that seam tape. You have to cut all the stitching out to pull that zipper out. You have to get it cut exactly the right length. You have to line them up so the zipper teeth line up correctly. And then to make it waterproof, you got to be able to seam tape it again. You're the dry cleaner on the corner of your town who can hem a pair of pants for you or put buttons on a shirt and do really good things to your everyday wear. They don't have the expertise in seam taping. And in some cases, removing that seam tape and reheating the adhesives, you have to heat them to a higher temperature than they needed to be heated to be activated. That damages the fabric or the membrane in itself and creates a weak spot in your jacket to where you may never get that one spot waterproof again. So the ability to repair some of those goods is really challenging. And I think that's a big piece of it. And then the cost, to your point, the cost of having someone that skilled in the right machinery and taking the time to do it, it becomes really expensive. And no one wants to pay, I'm making this up, man. I have so many ways I could take this, but no one wants to pay $300 because it was $100 in parts and we're paying somebody, $50 an hour, making these numbers up. So it costs $200 for a 2-hour repair to replace a waterproof zipper. Like I could buy a new jacket for $200.
Mm-hmm. Are there, back to the low-hanging fruit, I typically ask questions that revolve around low-hanging fruit for some reason, but what is in the soft goods apparel, backpacks tends to sometimes a little bit easier, obviously not zippers, but there seems to be ways to solve problems like that. Is there a place, and what role does gear repair play in the outdoor industry to keeping us kind of on that circularity track?
There's a couple of groups here in the Seattle area in the broader Seattle area that we've talked to who are specialized in this. Yeah, if you can cut off and replace bits and pieces and parts and do basic repair on backpack straps and plastic buckles, a lot of waterproof patches are a big one. I spent many years of my career in the fishing industry. I'm still a dedicated fly angler. So I thought, one of the angles I could have taken to repair things, like what does it cost to get a fly rod repaired these days? It's kind of amazing, having worked in a fly rod factory, to understand what they have to do to fix it and how quick they can do it and how relatively affordable it is. That's another expensive, durable item that, I think there's a high level of emotional attachment to fly rods, like there is sometimes to your number one ski jacket type thing. Waterproof patches is a big piece. In the wader business and fishing, you slather on, AquaGuard or some of these UV cure glues, and you just sort of don't care. It's a scar. It's a badge of honor that you've had to patch your waders a couple times for most of those hardcore anglers. That just says, I spend more time on the river than you do, which, is kind of a big deal sometimes. But when you start talking about jackets, sometimes people get a little squirrely who say, other than the crowd who love to wear it as a badge of honor, they go, I don't want a big ugly patch on my jacket. It's about rule number one is you got to look cool. So some of the low hanging fruit is, in my mind, is learning how to care for your gear properly. And most folks don't wash and dry or don't clean their waterproof breathable jackets as often as they should. That's a huge component to preventing problems down the road. But I think that's the biggest piece. And then just like your first aid kit, people have to have, maybe not in their backpacks when they're on trips, but at home, you have to have some basic gear to repair your own gear, and then skill to do so. And that might mean either talking to people or watching YouTube videos and how do I correctly sew a patch onto my tent?
Yeah, there's lots of, YouTube's a wealth of information for that stuff for sure.
Oh yeah, it's changed the game for sure. And I don't know how to do this. You just Google it and you're like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm going to do everything I can to avoid taking this conversation down to fly fishing because that's my passion too. So, okay, we're just going to resist the urge to talk about repairing fly fishing rods. And because I just had one repaired. And I was so happy that it was so affordable. It was unbelievable.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're like, God, it's so sad when it breaks. And then you're like, oh, that's it. You fixed it. That was awesome. Thank you.
And it's good as new.
Yeah. Good for another 20 years, hopefully. So maybe this is a good time to talk about PFAS because
Sure.
You brought it up a couple of times. We're talking about materials. We're talking about taking care of our gear and washing and repairing. Give back to the give us the high level view of what's coming down here with PFAS. What is it? Probably a lot of people have heard about it and know a little bit about it, but like, what are we looking at and kind of what's around the corner for the industry as it relates to PFAS?
Yeah, it's a huge thing headed towards the consumer, and I want them to understand what's changing, because we at the brand level are terrified that people are be like, "What's wrong with this brand?" And it's nothing. This is the future of what our industry looks for. So, at a really high level, PFAS is poly or perfluoroalkyl substances. They are they're known as forever chemicals. The fluorine carbon atom bond is one of the strongest known to man. It's really good at persisting everywhere, which is why it gets the moniker of forever chemicals. It doesn't break apart naturally or very easily. It takes a gajillion years, and it's measured in geologic time, and takes the force of lightning to break it. Those are two statistics from other podcasts and articles and stuff that I've heard. So I'm just repeating those two pieces. It was invented back, as Teflon is kind of the branded name of what this stuff was. It's really good at having things not stick to it. Turns out it also bioaccumulates and has been known for a long time to be pretty darn toxic. Specifically toxic in water and in ingestion and getting into the bloodstream of people. It's a reproductive and cancer risk. But in its solid state, the harm has been much more murky to prove. And again, this is a really political thing that I want to desperately avoid getting added and accused, because I'm working on this really hard at the industry level and at the OR level. It's a bad chemical. It needs to go away. But one of the things that I like to point out to folks is in the outdoor industry and the use of it, most cases in the outdoor industry, the risk to the end user of our product is pretty low. There's not really any science that says you wearing your Gore-Tex jacket is going to cause you birth defects or cancer. Disposing of that garment, again, durable goods, and putting it into a landfill or putting it into a waste stream where it could end up incinerated is absolutely a vector of it getting into the natural environment. So the worst thing people can do right now is probably throw away stuff they own that has PFAS in it. You should use it to the end of its functional life. But getting rid of PFAS in an urgent fashion has definite environmental improvements, because you can't get rid of this stuff. And it has a human health improvement immediately in the supply chain. And again, that's what I do. So I'm passionate about that, to say my friends in Taiwan who stand over a machine that dumps in PFAS chemistry 7 or 6 days a week for however many hours, those are the ones who are going to immediately see improvements to their health and into that natural environment there, long before the citizens of a state in the U.S. see massive improvements in the outdoor space. So that's kind of the land set as you think about it here versus cosmetics or food industry or groundwater problems with it around air bases and airports and et cetera. Like, those are different. So consumers, what are you going to see change? This is stuff that's used in durable water repellency. It's the chemistry applied to fabrics, not only in rainwear, but other places like swimwear and trekking pants, et cetera, that cause the water to bead up on the surface of your garment. It's not going to be as durable. And so what does that mean? In the days of yesteryear, we've already moved from C8 chemistries to C6 chemistries, and now we're saying C0, and that's a bit of a misnomer. So we've already downgraded in like 2006, 2012, kind of the early aughts is when we changed from some of the worst of these chemicals, which were unbelievably durable, to this less durable version that still works really well. So that means that your rain jacket will work for 5+ years. And in most cases, you don't really have to do a whole lot to keep it in its peak performance. You might notice a couple of areas where it kind of wets out. The face of that fabric gets wet. And a lot of people say, my jacket's leaking. And then the retail staff that you would go into say, no, it's just dirty. You got to go wash it. Like, oh, look, it came back to life. The problem you're going to get into now is that DWR with no fluorine in it has zero oil repellency. And that goes to oil dropping off the chairlift when you're skiing, to the ketchup that falls off your hot dog, to sweat. Human sweat, isn't oil. So essentially, the moment you take a brand new piece of fabric, it beats water perfectly. And at 2:00 in the afternoon, you wipe your forehead and you rub a little circle on that fabric and you spray a little water on it. It doesn't repel water as well. So the change that's coming to the consumer level in the outdoor industry is you're going to have to take care of your waterproof or water resistant product differently to extend the lifetime. Most of these chemistries are durable with some care and some wash and clean and recharge. And there's partners out there. Ours is Nikwax, which is a leader in the space who's really good at cleaning and recharging your gear. That's going to be what you're going to have to do to keep those products lasting as long as you want them to, and we want them to, and we intend them to, and at the performance that the consumer wants.
So this seems like an inflection point kind of in the history of the industry, and inflection points are always a good place for innovation to pop up and to take hold. So do you see this as a place where new innovation is going to come in, or is it an opportunity for existing products to just replace what we've been using? Like, or is it a mix of both?
It's a mix of both, but it's over-indexing in the innovation side. We as an industry have been working on this whole C0 concept, the non-fluorinated DWRs, for 10 plus years. And some brands did it faster than others and are okay with the performance, changes that have come about from it. I've been playing with it for several years here at OR, back to my product manager days. And to get the level of performance, we're getting dorky now, but to get the level of performance that we wanted, many of the suppliers were putting too much of the chemicals on the fabric to try to hit the performance, which would cause something called chalking, which essentially is that there's so much chemicals latent in the face of the fabric, you could run your fingernails down the fabric and it would look like waxed canvas. You would end up with literally like claw marks going through your fabric, and that was chalking. And imagine then taking your jacket and crumpling it up like a waxed canvas jacket, and it gets that aged, distressed look. Well, in your rain jacket, most people are like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with this? So we didn't move forward with it. And one of the first moves into a non-fluorinated DWR outdoor research did, I'll be totally honest, was a tragic failure. It was awful. It was a huge catastrophe. So we slowed down some of that work because we're like, oh my gosh, we didn't get that right. That happens, people. Then this PFAS ban started to approach, and it was like all of a sudden you got to hurry up and get this done because now you don't have a choice. So we're subbing in some chemistries and we're working through some of that. It just doesn't work as well. Right. So the innovation opportunity ahead of us is probably once in a decade, maybe 2 decades opportunity for finally the waterproof breathable space to go through a pretty significant innovation lead. That's going to come at a significant amount of work and cost. But I said this once before, and it kind of opened a bunch of people's eyes. So I'll say it again. We figured out as a species how to bend the laws of physics to keep water out of something, but maintain some levels of breathability. That's an inverse relationship. The more breathable, the less waterproof. The more breathable, the more waterproof, the less breathable. Right? Like that is an inverse relationship. One of the solutions was using a really durable water repellency in the face of that fabric to continue to allow moisture out. Now that's not working as well. We need to learn how to rebend the laws of physics.
Challenge, gauntlet laid. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, when you hear that, people go, whoa, that's heavy. But that is what we do in this industry. And it's, it's not always beakers and science and people in a lab. Sometimes it's just talking with your supply chain, finding alternatives and testing product, which is sort of the fun part. I wish we did it more in this industry, but that's the fun part of what we do sometimes is, hey, let's take 2 days and go for a day hike together and get dirty and get wet and see if it works.
Sure. So it looks like Outdoor Research has you mentioned the Nikwax partnership, and you have a product coming out here in the fall that's launching. That is, well, I won't take away the punchline. You tell me. What is this mask you're producing?
I resisted talking about this earlier when you said things I'm proud of, because I wanted to talk about the higher level, sort of 30,000 foot level. But this is probably the thing I'm most excited about and frankly the most proud of in one of the top 3 in my career that I've been a part of and had a lot of opportunity to lead this particular product. We have a new waterproof jacket coming out for fall 24. I think it's going to be available in wholesale and not on our website for a couple of reasons for the first season. So it might be slightly more challenging to find it, which will be fun. But in spring 25, it will be all over the place. And it's the relaunch of our number 1 selling collection, the Foray Aspire jacket. It is essentially the most sustainable rain jacket that we could economically create, back to my economic versus technical. And what we basically did here was take a jacket and we built it with as much sustainability elements in it that we possibly could to reduce its impact, which included partnering with Nikwax in a first in the industry apparel application of their recharge chemistry at the production level. So usually you would buy a jacket, you would buy a bottle of Nick Wax, and when you needed it, you would use it. This jacket is coming with their chemistries built on it from the factory level, which is essentially rechargeable for a long time. We've tested it out to 20 washings. One of the other things about waterproof breathable jackets and washing and drying them is at some point, some of those membranes do start to break down in the wash. We've wash tested this thing out to 20 consumer washings, which that's the lifetime of the garment for most people, probably. And it does not lose any of its waterproofness. It's durable all the way out. It is fully recycled. It's a dope dyed backer. It's RCS certified. It's a blue sign approved textile. There's no solvents in the membrane. It's got the Nick Wax rechargeable DWR in it. And the icing on the cake, we went through an exhaustive process to get it to be certified carbon neutral. It was a 4-way NDA where we worked through, our broker for these credits, but then also through a third party who validated all the work and calculations to make sure that it was correct. So we've done everything we can to make it the most sustainable product. And then we baked the cost of all these credits into the cost of the jacket. So every time a consumer buys one of these garments, it is cradle to grave certified as carbon neutral, wow, which is really exciting and tip of the spear. We're the first in the industry to achieve this. There's been some running shoes that have been done. Brooks, another Seattle brand who frankly gave us a little bit of help in this project. So we owe them a thank you publicly. And in other spaces, but this is the first of the industry. And it was one of those experiences where this is going to be the tip of the spear for starting our journey towards neutrality, carbon neutrality for us. But at the same time, we're putting ourselves out there to what I said earlier, which is I'm sure we made mistakes. This is a not perfect science. The science is continuing to evolve, and there's a lot of assumptions that had to be made in these calculations. I hope we get somewhat celebrated for what we tried to accomplish and for the moment of what we did. And we're willing to help and share how we did it, by the way. We will do that and not necessarily get attacked in that, yeah, but, because this is a huge risk. And I spent a lot of capital inside the building trying to make sure that we accomplish this the way we did and take the risk to say, we might get some negative press and blowback on it. We haven't yet, thank God. I'm immensely proud of our team and the full product development team, and everybody was involved in this because it was a huge, leap of faith repeatedly in several steps of the process to get to where we are. We're really proud of this product. It's awesome.
That's cool. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait for people to get their hands on it, get it on their backs. We've been field testing it for a long time. I mean, I've been still wearing one of the original pieces we built, and it performs awesome. It's a great product.
So you mentioned first it's kind of move you towards, or move the company towards kind of a net zero. What so do you have a bunch of products now in the pipe that are coming out that are going to be doing that, or is this one of those things where you got to get it out there, kind of see what the market happens, and then you can start to add things to it? Or do you have a whole list of things that are going to be following this thing quickly?
Well, my plan was to do one every season. I'm smiling if you can't see, if you're listening and you can't see me, I'm smiling ear to ear right now because that was what we had intended to do. But I think what we're going to end up having to do is what you said, which is make sure that this gets out there, make sure that it sells, make sure that people understand why it is what it is. And we tell the story, which goes back to the communications piece and greenwashing versus green hushing. It's a big risk, and it's a moment of trust to say we're going to put ourselves out there. If it works, we have to do it anyway. But if it works and if people are behind it, we do want to continue to do this. The amount of money that the carbon credit part costs is astoundingly affordable. And I think that's where some people are like, wait, I don't want to talk about this. I was like, no, that's not the point. Right. So it's not going to cost us much money for us to do this. But back to one of the things you said earlier around, you can't control your supply chain. Those carbon credits are meant to offset, or I should say to negate some of the things we can't control. You can't build a waterproof jacket and have it actually at the end of the day come off the factory line fully carbon neutral.
Sure.
I mean, maybe super small batch and really controlled specific R&D environments, but bulk production, you can't do that. And that's what this is intended to do. There will be more products in the future that come through with this, but the other important things, back to you can't reduce what you can't measure. Just like a tax credit versus a tax deduction, it's kind of the same accounting mentality that these carbon credits do not lower our carbon footprint. They don't really count for the climate goals we've put forth. These just sort of offset where we are. So essentially, again, getting to net zero as an organization is not emitting no carbon. It's figuring out ways using lots of other projects, like planting trees is a great example, very basic and simple one, that allow you to say, net, our organization is zero. You're still going to emit some small amount of latent carbon, but what are you doing through all kinds of technology and other projects to offset or negate that carbon that you're putting out by reducing carbon elsewhere?
That's very cool, Alex.
That's kind of what this project is meant to start proving.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I think, quite frankly, I don't think outdoor research gets enough credit for the things that they innovate with. I think sometimes,
thank you.
Yeah, I think sometimes, what you said, it's like, you're kind of like the largest of the small guys and the smallest of the large guys. And sometimes, the silent assassins in some ways. And I think that's, I think that's an okay thing. Cause I mean, especially the thing that I see the most of, and I'm kind of the most impressed with recently, is the plus size product line that outdoor research has come out with. I think that is like, it's truly innovative, like, in the sense of like from a marketing perspective, but also from a product design perspective. So I don't want to like take us down that's a whole nother conversation, but I just want to say all that to say that I think it's pretty awesome what you guys are doing at outdoor research and pushing the limits on things.
Thank you. I mean, that's a great example of something too, that it costs money, but we think it's the right thing to do. And we work with some people who really are good at helping us understand that project. And I wasn't involved in that one, so I certainly am not the right person to speak to it, other than to say it's a cool thing to be a part of, and it's a part of our brand and what we've stood up for that allows all of us to feel really good about where we work and what we stand for. And I think that mentality across all the different things we're doing, and appreciate you saying we're not always given as much credit. And I think that is the greenhushing situation we were talking about, is we are a little worried as to how we talk about this to be meaningful and be truthful. The other part of this is the consumer in some senses is not educated enough in the nuance of carbon accounting and all the details we go through. And it's like, well, how do you ever talk about this if you have to try to help people understand what it is you're even talking about in the first place? Is it worth that at that point? Constant contact there. It's a noisy place right now trying to speak with your consumer.
Yeah, for sure.
So in the absence of having a good playbook there and still trying to kind of figure it out, at some point we build good value quality product. And that is our number one speaking point to the consumers. When someone takes the lead to buy our gear, we're pretty confident their experience is going to be positive.
Nice.
And then
okay, well, we're coming up on our time here, and I want to be cognizant. You've got a team to run, multiple teams to run there at OR. Just to end with a couple of rapid fire questions, just to kind of in closing. So, what are you world class at?
Man, I saw this on your secret. They usually send questions ahead of time for you here on podcast. I saw this on there and I was like, I kind of hope he doesn't ask me this one, because it's like, kind of try to be a more humble guy. I'm like, I don't want to answer that.
Oh man, I'm letting you rolling out the red carpet for you to walk on, bro. Do it.
I thought about this ironically in having a shower this morning, which is where I do all my good thinking, right? Actually I didn't shower this morning. It was last night. It was on my bike this morning, but I would say that I have a really good skill at explaining complicated things in layman's terms that everyone can understand. And I've heard this repeatedly through my career on stage at sales meeting or discussing technology and just trying to get people to understand some of it. It's funny because I look back on the conversation we had today, and there probably was some interesting moments of explaining some things that are really difficult. And it's been a skill that I've honed over the years that I really do feel I'm pretty good at, but it's not something that I use to my own advantage per se. I think that it's a skill that I can give more than take, just to help people and as our sales reps and our team internally be like, wait, how do we talk about this carbon neutral jacket thing, Alex? I'm so confused. Like, all right, let me break it down for you. And at the end, most people are like, okay, I get it.
That's great.
And to me, that's job well done of arming my team with the things that they need, or our team that we need. So it's something I'm really good at, but I like to think that it's a give skill.
Well, great. That's a great skill to have then. I agree. I think you are world class at it. And our mutual friend who connected us, Louis Julien Waugh, who is
Hi, Louis.
Sales rep for Outdoor Research.
Great human being.
Great. One of the best, one of the early episodes of the Core Outdoor podcast with Louis, and he's brought a lot of value to my life personally. He said a very similar thing about you to me when I asked him about you. So I think your world-class skill is being noticed. So I agree 100%. So if you could do it over again, what would you do the same, but earlier in your career?
Travel internationally.
Nice.
One of the biggest regrets I have in my life, and I don't really believe in regret to some extent, but one of the biggest regrets I have is that I didn't study abroad. I didn't travel abroad early enough in my career. It's a huge piece of my job. I love it. Some people go begrudgingly or say, oh, it was going to be a long week. I love it. I look forward to it. New experiences, new food, new culture. Several people I've worked with in the industry long enough now, they're kind of my friends. I'm like, I get to go see my friends. I'm not just going on a business trip. If I had studied abroad or if I had had the opportunity to travel for my job earlier, I probably would be doing things somewhat different in that sense. And I don't know what that means other than to say, like, I can't even envision myself in a career right now that doesn't take me around the world. So for me, it was not having spent the money and the time to study abroad.
Interesting. Yeah, no, those are really good points. And final question, I ask this to everybody. How do you define success for yourself?
Yeah, this is a good question. And I think this is one I should ask myself, yearly. It changes. Your definition of success changes. I'm a dad now. I've got an 8-year-old son that has given me a completely different perspective on life and success and what it means day to day. I think success for me is just trying to be happy. There's so many people who go through the grind of what we do in the industry, and it's a long road, right? Your career is not linear. It twists and it turns and it gives you curves that you don't anticipate. And you got to slow down a little bit and figure out how to reaccelerate out of that turn. Success for me right now is just trying to maintain the balance in my life to be a good partner and a good dad and be home and be present and be around, but also doing good in my career, making the money it takes for my family to have what they need, and ideally putting a positive impact back into the world for what I do. I think my definition of success these days is balance.
Nice. Great. That's what I always like to say. Success is not one size fits all. We all should have a different definition of what it means to each of us.
It's very different than it would have been 5 or 8 years ago, for sure, and probably what it will be 10 years from now. And I'm not always good at being balanced, for the record.
Yeah, because we're not always successful.
Yeah. Life is like that. So I think that's what I would say. I thank you for having me on. This is a great conversation. A lot of fun.
I appreciate it. No, your world-class skill of taking complicated topics and ideas and making them so that people like me can understand them is very much appreciated. And I know it will be that way for the audience who listens to it. So do you have any parting thoughts before we take off? And one question I had for you is, like, where can we find out more about the Catalyst event that you mentioned in Seattle?
Yep. The Catalyst event is an Outdoor Industry Association event. So it's not open to the public.
Okay.
But if you're in the industry and want to attend and you're an OIA member, you can find details on OIA's website. I think it's now public. The agenda's in its final draft phase. If you're in the sustainability space within the OIA, there's a good chance you've already been emailed about it for sure. I'd be happy to come back on and talk about some of the things we talk about afterwards. Closing thoughts. Get educated. I mean, if you are listening to this and you find this fascinating and interesting and you want to learn more about sustainability in the outdoor space and product and impact reduction, try to learn everything that you can about it so that as you get presented with information from brands, from companies, even from the media, you can, start to understand it and suss out what's right and what's wrong. The way we combat greenwashing and green hushing is not through doing a better job at communicating or doing a better job at understanding what we should do. It's the consumer understanding what we're trying to tell you. I think it's a two-way street.
Sure.
Like, the onus right now is on the brand to don't do it bad. But at the same time, if everyone's education rises to the point where we're having better conversation about the things we're trying to explain, then we're just going to get better at everybody understanding what we're doing.
Perfect. Good way to end it. Alex, I really appreciate you brought the knowledge, you brought the A game, and I really appreciate you schooling me on all these things that I had questions about. So I look forward to our next conversation.
I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you know someone who would enjoy this episode, please share it with them. If you enjoyed it, take 30 seconds to give us a review on your podcast player. Ratings and reviews go a long way in spreading the word about the show. It takes hours to create an episode and only 30 seconds to leave a review. We'd really appreciate it. To learn more about CORE, visit coreoutdoors.org. That's KORE outdoors.org. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.